Kinemon is a unit spam deck that's all about overwhelming the opponent with simply faster options. The gimmick is to use simple cost reductions and unit 2-for-1s for massive early game pressure. Since my last update in OP4, this deck has received a ton of new pieces of support that dramatically expand the deck's plays and the level of skill needed to pilot the deck. The deck can now actually go first, and can do so in an extremely threatening manner, mostly through using Hiyori combos. The deck also has access to more counter value than ever, thanks to Otama, and the deck can throw out unique unit spam. I'll also include builds for OP6 and EB01 at the end of this video, so y'all don't have to wait for this guide to be relevant. Let's start by explaining the early game plays. Going early, we want to follow one of our basic combo lines. This changes depending on if we go first or second. Of course, depends on the matchup whether or not you want to go first or second. Going second, the ideal play is of course to play Okiku turn 1. Okiku disables an opponent from playing any 5 cost or lower unit, effectively removing an opponent's first 3 turns from mattering. They can't play early blockers, they can't even try to play anything unless it has 5k and more stats. If your opponent's deck depends on early game pressure or cheap units, Okiku is very strong, and they will have to deal with it. It's less good against decks like purple and yellow, but Okiku is a key starting point. Unfortunately, even with Mulligan, the odds of seeing Okiku in your opening hand are only around 64%, and the odds of going second are of course 50%. Okiku can be followed up with Ryuma to get an immediate KO if we're scared an opponent can guard their unit, or we can follow up with a 5-drop Yamato to start pressuring life. Going first, however, we have 3 different options. Now, it is important to note that we really don't have a good turn 1 play. There's not really a good reason to play Momosuke early, because he's usually just fodder for removal. Plus, using his ability next turn would mess up our curve in a lot of cases. We can play the Otama Searcher, however, a unit being on board messes with our leader skill, and we don't really want to use the 2k counter as it's better just to have guard. You should use it if you'd otherwise brick, or to guarantee seeing a Hiyori combo, as I'll discuss. With 3 Dawn, we can use a cost-reduced Kazuki Hiyori to play a 5-drop Yamato or Yama-san from our hand. That's a 5-cost unit for 3 Dawn. Doing a Yamato play just wins against yellow. They don't have an easy 4-drop to counter this. Even if they play a blocker, we can just rest it. They will have to drop their hand, or lose out on so much value and triggers from life. Unfortunately, the odds of this aren't great, being only about 40% with mulligans. But this is why we also run 4 Yama-san, which bumps our odds to doing something consistently to around 56%. Yama-san isn't as good against yellow as Yamato, but it is a 7k base unit that you can get out on turn 2. That's insane for a lot of decks to deal with. You can get ahead of curve against something like, let's say, Bonnie. Your matchup against Bonnie isn't bad, but you just have to be really good at sequencing to play around it. Now, to further boost the consistency of this combo, we can use the Otama Searcher, and it brings our odds of either play to being more so a 70% chance. This is absolutely crazy. A 70% chance to just cripple yellow decks out of the gate, and really most decks in the game right out of the gate. Insane. Our second option going first is we can hard drop Ryuma. We can do this with or without a 3-drop Mihawk to create massive pressure. Against Sakazuki, if we drop Mihawk and Ryuma, they almost physically can't remove both on turn 2. Certainly not while developing a board or without wasting resources. Plus, they really want to use Houndblaze to KO Ryuma, so it's just an L for them. Following up Ryuma with another Ryuma, or more unit resting, absolutely stresses Black's resources to the breaking point. Since they're 4 cost, they have to go 2 for R1. Being able to spam these over and over again doesn't have the best odds. This leaves us with our last option, which of course is just dropping Okiku again, but with 1 extra Dawn open. It's not as good since Sakazuki and other decks can out it a lot easier going second than they could going first. But since the option really does just obliterate a ton of rogue decks and decks that need to focus on board control, it's worth keeping open. So these are your opening plays. I've developed the ratios of this deck to use the optimal opening plays as consistently as possible. Also note that for counters, there are 12 2Ks, 21 Ks, and 18 no counters. It's still a bit low on the counter side, but honestly it's infinitely better than the deck used to be. So you won't need to bluff counter in hand as much. So after establishing a board, how do we push for game? Kinemon is a very aggressive deck. As such, our finishers are super aggressive. Well, except for Dofi, who's a backup plan. First and foremost, we can attempt to establish the Yamato double swing banish. You win the game 90% of the time, Yamato Swing hits. Against any matchup, removing 2 cards from the opponent's hand and extra trigger effects is too much of a swing in value for an opponent to compensate for. It's usually advisable to rest blockers through any means necessary, then put at least 4 Dawn on Yamato Swing to force an opponent to take it. Either it eats their hand, or obliterates life as a resource. In this current meta, Yamato is basically impossible to resolve against Sakazuki and Gekko Moria. It's better just to throw out cheaper, more proactive units, and just keep Yamato in hand for counter value. Unless of course you have Hiyori, and then go for it. Secondarily, we should be looking to develop our lead by welcoming our opponent to the wonderful world of 4-cost Yamato and Ryuma spam. 6k power for 3 costs combined with good on-play effects is insane for removal-based decks to handle. Keep throwing them out and they have to lose going 2 for 1 on cards you don't actually care about. It also keeps them from establishing counters like Kuzan or Rebecca. Hoodie Jones is a rush option that can force a board clear, or it can push for game, and an opponent always has to respect the option. It shuts down an opponent's counter swing, and can punish decks like Nami that try and life-starve you. I'd love to run more copies, but between not having counter and being so costly to use, it's locked into being a maximum of 2 copies. 8-drop Kazuki Odin has 2 situations he'll come up in. First, if we trade well throughout the game and leave up a full board, we can throw out an Odin to secure a win. If an opponent wastes removal on it, it stops the rest of their plays and protects our honestly more problematic board. Though, do assume Odin will never be removed by KO. Blue will bottom deck it or return to hand. Yellow will put it into life. Red, black, and purple will just try to race you through life, and green will keep it continuously rested. And if an opponent has just taken the lead from you, they will feel pressured to try to get rid of your Odin. But of course, Odin almost always takes a ton of resources to kill. Even with black decks, it gives you an in back into the game, as it's another jumping off point. Kazuki Odin is odd to use, since whether or not he's a viable play is entirely determined by how many resources you remove from the opponent's early game. You need to track an opponent's Hound Blazes, Ice Ages, and Great Eruptions. If it gets spot decked, you lose. Same with 8-drop Katakuri in yellow. If they can't respond to it, they lose. If they can, you lose. Odin also has a ton of use against Bonnie, since you can use his effect to play around Bonnie's rest skill, and you can use the restand to unrest if it would be frozen. Of course, everything mentioned before isn't usually enough, and an opponent will inevitably make a counterplay comeback. This is where we crush their dreams with our 10-drop Dofi. Don Quixote do Flamingo is a board control finisher. If for some reason we can't establish board control, or start to lose it later on, we can play 10-drop Dofi to shut down an opponent and cheese out a win anyway. 10-drop Doofy just makes sense. It's super hard to get rid of, it counters yellow and black quite a bit, and it gives us something to try and handle purple. If you've liked this video so far, please subscribe. I'm trying some new formatting and editing techniques, so I hope you all have been liking those so far. To summarize and help you, here's a little guide I made summarizing the best early moves. Let's do a recap of this deck's strengths and weaknesses before we finish off. It's got insane early game board control, an insane consistent combo, insane board spam, direct counters for yellow, black, and green, top end with protection and defense. However, the deck does have to get ahead early. It's got a clunky leader and unit skills. Sometimes the top end is difficult to use, and it loses the purple badly. Kinemon takes a ton of skill to pilot successfully, but once you figure out the kinks, it's easy to recommend to every player. Now, here's my alternate deck list. OP6 is a weaker time for the deck. It's not bad, but it lacks a going first play. You really want to wait at least until you can replace the Tony Chopper 2K with Mihawk for this to be relevant. It gives you something going first and lets you counter Sakazuki, but you need to be able to do in OP6. For Extra Booster 1, you have practically everything you could need outside the 2K Otama for consistency. I recommend replacing it with 2 Punk Gibson and 2 Ashura Doji. It's bad, but it's another going second play that isn't Raizo. I hope you all like this Kinemon deck profile. It's a deck I absolutely adore, and I think everyone should give it a try. If only Yamato was cheaper, so more people could play the deck. It's unfortunate, but thanks Bandai. I hope they reprint those sets a bit faster. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.